all. This is my next video in the series of clinically oriented anatomy case-based questions and answers with explanations, which will help in integrating the knowledge of anatomy with clinical aspects. This video contains 5 clinical scenario-based MCQs related to head and neck part 2. Coming to scenario 1, during examination on a patient, it was observed that when the physician gently touched his right cornea with a wisp of cotton, only the right eye blinked. But when the left cornea was touched, then also only the right eye blinked. You might also expect the patient to have A. An altered sensation in the skin of the left half of forehead. B. A dry right eye. C. An inability to wrinkle the skin of the left half of forehead. D. Difficulty converging the eyes for near vision. The correct answer is C. An inability to wrinkle the skin of the left half of forehead. So let's learn about the reflex which is known as the corneal or blink reflex. The corneal or blink reflex is a reflex in which if we gently touch the cornea with a wisp of cotton, these sensations are carried by the ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve up to the spinal nucleus of trigeminal, which will eventually project to the motor nucleus of facial nerve, which will give fibers to the facial nerve, and the facial nerve will then supply the orbicularis oculi muscle, which will contract and cause blinking, not only of the same eye but of the opposite eye also. So the afferent limb, that is sensory, is the ophthalmic nerve, and the efferent limb, that is motor, is the facial nerve. Normally when one side cornea is touched with a wisp of cotton, there is bilateral blinking response, which is known as consensual reflex. So loss of corneal reflex may occur if either sensory component, that is ophthalmic nerve, is lesioned, or motor, that is a facial nerve, is lesioned. In this figure we can see the sensory, that is the afferent, which is carried by the ophthalmic division of trigeminal from the cornea, then trigeminal ganglion, then the spinal trigeminal nucleus via spinal tract of trigeminal, which will project to the medial longitudinal fasciculus, through it to the main motor nucleus of facial of both the sides. So from the main motor nucleus of facial, the fibers of facial of both the side, it will supply respective orbicularis oculi muscle. So the ophthalmic is the sensory and the facial is the motor. Now coming back to the question, when the right cornea is touched, there is blinking of right eye only. It means that the right ophthalmic, that is sensory, is normal, and the right facial is also normal because there is blinking of the right eye. When the left cornea was touched, there is only blinking of right eye. It means that there is sensation present on the left side. That's why there is blinking of right eye, but there is no blinking of the left eye. So ophthalmic nerve of both the sides are normal, and the facial nerve on the right is also normal because there is blinking of right eye in both the cases. So the lesion is most probably in the left facial nerve supplying the left orbicularis oculi. That's why there is no blinking in the left eye. So we just have to correlate that because the left facial is lesioned, the facial nerve also innervates the frontalis muscle, which will cause wrinkling of the skin of the forehead. So because the left facial nerve is affected, the left half of frontalis is also affected. That's why there is inability to wrinkle the skin of left half of forehead. In the option A, altered sensation in the skin of left half of forehead, which is innervated by ophthalmic nerve, but ophthalmic nerve on both the sides is normal. A dry right eye occurs because of loss of lacrimation, and that is also the preganglionic fibers carried by the greater petrosal branch of facial, but here the dry eye is on the right side. So that is not the correct answer. The dry eye would most probably on the left side and not the right side. because the left facial is affected. Also, difficulty converging the eyes for near vision. It is not the answer because convergence, as we know, it is done by the two medial recti muscles which are innervated by oculomotor nerve, and oculomotor nerve is not affected in this case. So the correct answer is inability to wrinkle the skin of left half of forehead. Now coming to scenario 2. During thyroidectomy in a patient with goiter, the surgeon notices a nerve entrapped and tightly compressed by a tortuous superior laryngeal artery which parallels the course of this nerve. Which of the following functions is most likely to be affected due to injury to this nerve? The options are A. Tension of the vocal folds, B. Sensation below the level of the vocal folds, C. Sphincteric action at the laryngeal inlet, D. Sensation above the level of the vocal folds. The correct answer is D. Sensation above the level of the vocal folds. So we must know that which nerve accompanies the superior laryngeal artery. In this case, that nerve is entrapped and tightly compressed by this artery. The nerve affected is the internal laryngeal nerve. The internal laryngeal nerve carries sensation from the mucosa of the larynx above the level of the vocal folds, so that will be affected. From this figure we can see here that there is a superior thyroid artery which is going towards the thyroid gland. It gives a branch, that is the superior laryngeal artery, which accompanies the internal laryngeal nerve. Internal laryngeal is a branch of superior laryngeal nerve, which is branch of vagus. So internal laryngeal nerve accompanies superior laryngeal artery, whereas the main continuation of superior thyroid artery is accompanied by external laryngeal nerve. The external laryngeal nerve supplies a cricothyroid muscle of the larynx which tenses the vocal fold. So in this case external laryngeal nerve is not affected, so there is no affection of tension of the vocal folds. Also there is one more nerve related to thyroid, and that is recurrent laryngeal nerve. The recurrent laryngeal nerve is related with the inferior laryngeal branch of the inferior thyroid artery, so that is also not affected in this case. The recurrent laryngeal nerve supplies all the muscles of larynx except cricothyroid, as well as the recurrent laryngeal nerve supplies the sensation from the mucosa of below the level of the vocal folds. So in this case tension of the vocal fold is not affected because that is done by the cricothyroid muscle supplied by external laryngeal nerve. Sensation below the level of vocal fold by recurrent laryngeal nerve, which is not affected. Sphincteric action is done by different muscles supplied by recurrent laryngeal nerve, so that is also not affected. So the affected nerve is internal laryngeal nerve accompanying superior laryngeal artery, and so this sensation above the level of vocal fold will be affected. Now coming to scenario 3. A 30-year-old man complains of dryness of the nose and the palate. This would indicate dysfunction of which of the following peripheral parasympathetic ganglia? And the options are A. Otic ganglion, B. Ciliary ganglion, C. Sphenopalatine ganglion, D. Submandibular ganglion. The correct answer is C. Sphenopalatine ganglion. Sphenopalatine ganglion is also known as pterygopalatine ganglion, which is responsible for supplying the mucosal glands of the nose, palate, nasopharynx, and also the lacrimal gland. So the dryness of the nose, palate, and there might be loss of lacrimation also, most probably because of the dysfunction of the sphenopalatine, that is pterygopalatine ganglion. The otic ganglion is responsible for supplying the secretomotor fiber to parotid gland. There is no decrease in salivation from parotid. The submandibular ganglion innervates the submandibular and sublingual gland and anterior lingual gland. So there is no decrease in salivation in this case. The ciliary ganglion, which innervates the two smooth muscles, intraocular muscles, sphincter pupillae and ciliaris, and there is no affection of these muscles. So there is only dryness of nose and palate, So the affected ganglion is most likely the sphenopalatine, that is pterygopalatine ganglion. Coming to scenario 4, a 27-year-old man has trouble with double vision, that is diplopia, after striking his head on the steering wheel in a car accident. During a subsequent eye examination, his ophthalmologist asked him to first look outward, that is away from nose, laterally, and then downward toward the floor. The integrity of which of the following extraocular muscles is being tested? The options are A. Inferior rectus, B. Superior oblique, C. Inferior oblique, D. Superior rectus. The correct answer is A. Inferior rectus. So we must know the action of the different extraocular muscles of the eyeball. First of all, in this figure we can see that the axis of eyeball is not the same as the axis of the orbit. Here we can see posteriorly is the apex of orbit, and all the recti muscle plus superior oblique arise near the apex of the orbit, as we can see in the next diagram here. From here, the inferior rectus will go forward, run forward and laterally on the inferior aspect and inserted into sclera inferiorly. Now there are two depressors of the eyeball. One is inferior rectus and other is superior oblique. Now how to isolate the action of these two muscles? So for this, we just have to ask the patient to first look laterally and then look down. So in this, you eliminate the action of the superior oblique. In this case, you are testing the inferior rectus muscle. If you ask the patient to look medially and then down, then you are testing the superior oblique muscle. So what we are actually doing is, because the axis of eyeball is different from the axis of orbit, so when we ask the patient to look laterally, that is abduct, so the axis of eyeball will become the same as the axis of the inferior rectus. Now from this position, that is abduction, when we ask the patient to look down, so we are basically testing the inferior rectus muscle. If we want to test superior oblique muscle, then we must ask the patient to look first medially, that is adduct it, so that the axis of eyeball will be same as axis of this superior oblique muscle, and then ask the patient to look down. So then there you are testing the superior oblique. So these are the various testing of the muscles. Ask the patient to look laterally, you are testing lateral rectus. Ask the patient to look medially, you are testing medial rectus. Now ask the patient to look laterally and then up, you are testing basically superior rectus. And ask the patient to look medially and up, you are testing inferior oblique. So for testing the different extraocular muscle, we simply ask the patient to follow the examiner's finger in H-shaped pattern. First, go laterally, you test the lateral rectus. From there up, you are testing superior rectus. From there down, you are testing inferior rectus. Then ask the patient to look medially, you are testing medial rectus. From here down, you are testing superior oblique, and up inferior oblique. So the correct answer in this case is inferior rectus muscle. Coming to scenario 5. A tumor is suspected to be embedded in the posterior wall of the tympanic cavity in a 68-year-old patient. If the tumor erodes through this bony wall, which of the following structures would most likely be encountered? The options are A. Temporal lobe of brain, B. Promontory, C. Auditory tube, D. Mastoid antrum. The correct answer is D. Mastoid antrum. So the tympanic cavity, that is the middle ear cavity, we must know the 6 walls of the middle ear, that is tympanic cavity: roof, floor, anterior, posterior, medial and lateral. In this figure, the lateral wall is removed. The lateral wall is formed by tympanic membrane, and through it we are looking exactly opposite the medial wall. In the medial wall, here we can see rounded projection, that is promontory. which is grooved by tympanic plexus. So promontory is actually present on the medial wall. Anteriorly we can see the canals for tensor tympani, auditory tube, and the carotid canal through which runs the internal carotid artery. So these are anteriorly. Floor, there is the thin plate of bone which separates the tympanic cavity from the internal jugular vein. In the roof we can see roof is formed by tegment tympani, part of petrous temporal bone, which will separate the middle ear from the temporal lobe of brain, so that is above. Whereas posteriorly we can see posterior wall here, the posterior wall separates the middle ear from the mastoid antrum, mastoid air cells, and the sigmoid sinus. So the tumor present on posterior wall, if it erodes through the posterior wall, most likely it will affect the mastoid antrum and mastoid air cells. So that is the correct answer. So thank you, and keep sharing, like and subscribe my channel for more such case-based scenarios involving clinical anatomy of all the regions of the body. Thank you.